there was always that sense of insecurity, that sense of fear that, I won't be able to manage the quality. I won't get so many people. That's it. I don't want to go any further. So there's always a case of reluctance to expand. One of the most difficult things that one has to learn is to say no. If you can't say no, then you are the one who lands up in trouble. And you're the one who ends up mopping up the mess and dealing with the consequences.
Thanks for joining us for Building Pakistan, a conversation with Pakistan's beloved institution builders to explore how they've built and really continue to build this young country. I'm Benji Williams from Amal Academy, and today we get to meet with Mrs. Nasreen Kasuri, who's the founder and chairperson of Beaconhouse School System, and formerly served as CEO for almost 30 years. She's built Beaconhouse into one of the largest private school systems in the world, and in today's conversation, we'll discuss with her evolution as a lifelong learner over Beaconhouse's 42-year history. From the initial days as just a project and her role as really just a parent trying to give her own kids a good education, to her transition as an entrepreneur burdened with conviction and with opportunity, to her evolution as a CEO, building Beaconhouse into the institution that it is today, and finally into her role now as chairperson. And of course, all along the way, being a spouse, being a parent, being a friend, being so many things to so many people. It's really an incredible story of how she managed to do it all and still does so much, and there's a tremendous amount from which we can learn. Should we get started?
Yeah, certainly, by all means.
Well, fortunately, you and Beaconhouse really don't need much introduction, and so I won't get into that so much in detail. But just to give a background for my own context, you guys have almost 200 schools in 9 different countries, over 280,000 students. I think the latest number I saw was 286,000.
I won't try to correct you because I don't have the figures in front of me, but I mean, if you've collected the figures, okay, you're probably right.
Yeah. It's very hard to keep track, I think, because things change on a daily basis.
I didn't know you were going to be asking me numbers or figures.
No, I'm not. I'm just kind of setting the context because it's hard to comprehend these numbers. I mean, employees is around 15,000, and it's been 42 years since you started out. And as a result, you have become one of the largest privately owned education systems in the world, which is fascinating and incredible and hard to get our heads around. And so I think in order to do that, it might make sense to go back to 1975, 42 years ago. And starting back when you had set up this Montessori school, and from my understanding, you were on the first floor of your grandmother's house in Goldberg. There were about 19 kids, 2 of them were your own. And what I'm really curious to understand is what inspired you to move beyond just that first nursery into the next school in 77? What inspired you to move beyond just this being a project or something that was supporting your kids and a smaller community? Can you kind of walk us through that thought process back then?
1975, I was out looking for a nursery school for my own children. And first time I started looking for one, and obviously this is when my children were off school going age, and I found that there was a vacuum. There was really nothing on offer, and what was there on offer was for early childhood education seemed totally inappropriate for 3-4-year-old children. And I did want them to go to school, but I didn't want them to go to those schools. And that frustration and that dismay at the total lack of proper nursery schools for young children led me to think that maybe I could do something myself. And the reason I mustered up that courage is because in my applied psychology, I had read about the Montessori system. And at that time, for lack of, more information, I would say I thought that the Montessori was the ideal system for early childhood education. And as it happened, there were a lot of Montessori schools in Karachi. And I thought, well, it's the same country. Karachi's had a lot of Montessori, has had these Montessori schools for a long time. Why not Lahore? So a lot of things sort of happened, fell in place in the sense that I went to Karachi to do a little bit of a survey, met with the Montessori Association ladies who, as it happened, had been wanting to start a Montessori school. So they thought that, this was the ideal opportunity. Here was somebody who was making inquiries about why there wasn't one in Lahore. So they encouraged me, and I thought, well, I needed, I felt that Lahore needed a good, school, Montessori, or something that supported early childhood education for my own children. So it was pretty selfish from that point of view. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I set up the Montessori school. My own children were, went to that school, and so did others. We had other children as well. And I would say that, for me it was fun and games. You
were having fun.
I was having fun. I was having great fun. My own children were there. They were going to school, but I wasn't separated from them. It was my grandmother's house, so I could get my cup of tea whenever I wanted to, and a snack if I wanted it. So it was like being at home, being with your children, and working, and running a school. And all the other children, the other 17 children, were children of my friends and acquaintances and all that. So it was a nice, clubby, comfortable arrangement. So those were, that was not very much like working. It was very nice. It was like a club. Every day in the morning you got up and you looked forward to, going to work, because, you had these group of lovely children, 2 of them your own, and, their mothers would come and drop them. Their mothers would come and pick them up. You would sit and have a cup of tea with them, have a chat, gossip session, and,
So this is exactly what I wanted to ask, is you almost were not an accidental entrepreneur, but you had the choice to keep having fun as a small project, but you then decided to kind of jump into not the misery of entrepreneurship, but certainly the challenge of entrepreneurship.
In these 2 years, I realized what a dearth of school seats there were. And in these 2 years, I realized that there was an immense need for a school. But because the government had not allowed the private sector to come into schools, I was doing a nursery, and you were only allowed to have up to kindergarten. You weren't even allowed to go into class 1. So there was this. So this was like, these 2 years was like somebody, an entrepreneur who would go and do a market survey. It became sort of a market survey. It made me aware of the great need that there was for a school, and how many children, let's say, panicky parents were getting. And I had parents asking me if I had any influence at Aitchison College or Convent of Jesus and Mary or the Sacred Heart Convent or the few schools, handful of schools that there were, and if I could help their children with admission to those schools. And I thought, oh my God, when it's time for my own children to go to school, what will I do? It's going to mean that I'll need sifarish. You know what sifarish is?
A reference.
In this part of the world, somebody sort of putting in a word for you. So I realized that there was this immense need, and Beaconhouse was not fun and games. Beaconhouse was serious. Now, the fortunate bit with me was that a lot of things fell in place. I had a very small group of teachers, and I was there administering it myself. And then there was a house available. There was my father-in-law's house, in which we live now, had fallen vacant the year before. And they were sort of looking at the possibility of renting it out. So I asked my father-in-law if I could take it from him, and he very kindly allowed me to.
This is 6A Main Boulevard.
That's right, where we live now.
Yeah.
It had been rented out for many, many years. It was with the Iranis, Khana-e Farhang Iran. And it fell vacant in 77 actually, and 78 was when this permission was awarded. So that sort of helped things quite a lot. And then the other thing was that I realized that okay, Lisonge was all very well, because I had a lot of people holding my hand and helping me with it, because they had an interest in doing the training in Lahore, so they helped me with getting the teachers and the equipment and setting up and all that. So I had a lot of hand holding with Lisonge. But then I thought, now who's going to do the hand holding with Beaconhouse? I don't know the first thing about running a school. So again, the ex-principal of HSN, Mr. Akram, was working with a business group, and I asked him if he could come and join me, and obviously he was an educator originally, and he was delighted. He said, yes, I will resign my job and come and join you. So once he agreed to join me, I had greater confidence, because at least he knew how to run a school. I didn't know the first thing about running a school. And I still remember those days of panic, because I didn't know. I knew nothing. Other than the fact that I'd gone to school myself, I knew nothing. So Akram Saab came, and all the nitty-gritty of running a school and everything sort of he put in. So we were able to launch in record time. The school opened in April 1978. We were able to, within 2 to 3 months of the permission, government giving the permission, we were able to open the school.
And I mean, I can just imagine it was a totally different experience than setting up Lisonge, the Montessori school.
Completely different.
What did you feel like when you were launching it? There must have been so many challenges. And what did you learn that first year? What was that process like?
You see, I learned a lot. It's very difficult to say what I learned, but the point is that the panic was there, because this is. There was this panic, and Akram Saab would keep saying to me, okay, now please calm down, relax, it's fine, calm down, because I would be panicking all the time, and then I wasn't used to taking pressure for admissions. I knew that there was a market need, but I didn't know how much, because I opened my doors for admissions. The way people came in and the numbers that came in, I couldn't handle it. I didn't have the teachers. I didn't have the furniture. I wasn't prepared for it. I was prepared. I had prepared myself for about 200 students. And, hordes came in. And then I didn't want to go beyond class 5, for instance. That we had discussed that, we'll only take up to class 5 and let them then go up one at a time. But, I had people sitting there and crying and pleading for a class 6, and then another lot for class 7. And I thought, my God, and I still remember, against my better judgment, I started class 6 and I started class 7.
In the first year? Or
in the first year. And my God, did I struggle with them, because most of them were dropouts. And this much I did know, that if I didn't produce a good result, I'd be sunk. So the amount of work I had to put in with those class 7 and class 6 students was phenomenal. I mean, it was phenomenal, the amount of money I had to spend on them. And I spent as much money on them as I did on the rest of the school. I remember there was this teacher of English as a second language, and she was in Islamabad. Her husband was working in Islamabad, and she was with him in Islamabad. And I used to fly her out every week from Islamabad, and she would sit and work with these students, because their language skills were so poor. Their language skills were so pathetic, and I thought, my God, these kids are not going to pass an exam.
So in some ways you might have overstretched yourself.
I did very much overstretched myself with classes 6 and 7. And also, I was not prepared for more than one section to a class. But I remember I was pushed and, jostled into, and then there's pressure from all sides, and I had to do class 1. There were so many students for class 1. I thought, oh my God, where do I put them? I didn't have the furniture, the space, nothing. But, anyway.
What was year 2 like?
What was?
Year 2 like? I guess this was
Year 2, obviously, as things are, year 2 was better. I made some of my mistakes, and I was more composed and but I'm not saying year 2 I was there. I was still learning, and I was still struggling.
And you were expanding within this single location, or I guess within 6A Main Boulevard.
Expanding within the single location, but there was such immense pressure in those days because schools, the private sector, the government had, even now the government education system, as you know, is, pathetic. And people are looking for private schools at every level. They're not necessarily Beaconhouse level. They're schools that charge 100 rupees, 200, 300, 500. So there was a lot of pressure. And then, and because my own children, are boys, so it started as a boys' school. Again, a very sort of, personal decision. Beaconhouse started as a boys' school, but then I had girls' parents at me that, why not a girls' school? So then we started a girls' school the very next year, actually.
Very next
started
year, okay.
The very next year.
79,
yeah.
I suppose. At the same building, just different?
No, another building. We rented a building. So we started a girls' school because, there was this issue that you can't have girls and boys studying together. So the girls' school started. And
so second year had the girls' school, and that was a completely new venture of sorts. You could use the same curriculum, I'm sure, a lot of the same teachers.
It wasn't a completely new venture. Obviously, it was the same name, same curriculum, some of the teachers, older teachers, were transferred there, and it was
because I'm just
much
wondering,
easier.
Someone might say, wait to start a girls' school until you get the boys' school established, until you figure it out. And
the pressure was very great in those days. It was the expansion in the earlier days was mostly demand driven. It wasn't planned. People say that what made you go to Islamabad or what made you go to Karachi? Mostly it was demand driven. Because this shortage of school seats was there all over Pakistan, not just in Lahore. And when Beaconhouse came up in Lahore, and we were practically the first, because in my case things did fall in place very easily. So I had people coming, and asking if I could start a school here and a school in Karachi, a school in Islamabad. So, a lot of the expansion of the earlier days was not driven by me, but it was driven by the market demand. And
so did you say no to any of those requests? Or was it always just
yes, one always
go?
said no to a lot of requests. You couldn't do
everything.
You couldn't go everywhere. I learned to say no. It takes time. In the earlier years, I didn't know how to say no. It takes you time to learn to say no and sort of do it nicely, politely, and all that. But one of the most difficult things that one has to learn is to say no.
How did you learn to say no?
You have to. You make your mistakes. You make your mistakes, and you realize that if you can't say no, then you are the one who lands up in trouble, and you are the one who ends up mopping up the mess and dealing with the consequences, like the classes 6 and 7 that I started simply because I couldn't say no. I should have been able to say no, but I couldn't say no. I didn't know how to say no. But it takes you. Over a period of time, you learn. Those are things that you learn as an administrator. Those are things everybody has to learn.
So you have the Montessori school, you have the boys' school, now you have the girls' school. Then what's next? Are you expanding outside of Lahore?
Okay. Karachi.
So you jump from Lahore all the way to Karachi.
Yeah.
That's a huge leap. Someone might say, I don't know what it was like at that time, but maybe Faisalabad or some of the other cities in
my
Punjab?
sister was there, so that
Okay.
gave me the courage.
Okay.
She was there, and she sort of.
So you went where you had connections.
Yeah, I went where I had connections. I had connections there, so I went there. So it was,
What was it like going to Karachi? As in, what did you learn? What was different about Karachi than Lahore? I feel a lot of entrepreneurs are thinking, should I expand to
Karachi is a much more
Islamabad?
professional city. I found that I got better teachers. And I found, as far as the office staff was concerned, I got good office staff. Karachi is it's a different world from Lahore. And if you're running a school or you're doing anything, it's so much. You get a lot of people who are trained, who got exposure. Professionally, it's a much more urbane city. So that way, I would say Karachi was easier. Maybe it was easier also because by that time I had about 2 to 3 years experience under my belt.
Okay.
But
so this was around 1980.
Yeah, it's
81.
79, 80.
Okay.
I would say 80.
So you had a few years. You had worked out, I guess, some of the curriculum and
a lot of things had been worked out. So you see, obviously, when I went to Karachi, I went there armed with a lot of stuff that I had sort of worked out. Things I knew what to do, how to do it. And I had a team also, a small team, not a big team, but I had a team. So that way it was much easier.
And when did you guys decide that this thing has potential to really scale? I mean, did that happen in Lahore before Karachi, or was it once you were in Karachi? What was the sort of light bulb or aha moment that this could be, a huge system that we can eventually become one of the largest education providers in the world? I mean, those are probably two different questions, but when did you know this was a scalable thing? It's the same question,
and basically, Benji, there wasn't any moment as such. There were no ambitions about becoming the largest in the world. And the fact that, I'm going to go to every city of Pakistan and I'm going to scale up. There was no one moment when one decided. For me, it was always a case of, okay, that's it. I don't want to go any further. I won't be able to handle it. There was always that sense of insecurity, that sense of fear that, I won't be able to manage the quality. I won't get so many people. That's it. I don't want to go any further. So there's always a case of reluctance to expand. I did continue to expand. Like I said, that it was very demand driven, but there was always that insecurity and fear. You see, the most important factor in a school, in education, in an education institution, is the quality of the staff that you have. And it was very difficult to get good quality, properly trained staff. And then running an English medium school in a country where the language is not English and it's sort of Urdu. To find people who speak English fluently was a problem. So, somewhere along the way, we decided that there was, instead of looking for those few trained teachers, we had to do our own training. So we started our own training. We were the first. You see, we have a lot of firsts to our credit. And that is what I feel has sustained us and given us the advantage over other schools. Because most other schools in the market depend upon teachers trained by us. There's this poaching game that goes on. We don't like it, but then there's nothing much we can do about it. But we are constantly training, and we have been training. We started training way back in the 80s. We started training because we realized that, I realized that I couldn't find teachers. We just couldn't find trained teachers. Just being able to speak good English wasn't the right qualification for being able to teach in a classroom. So we started that. So there was always, there was always that fear that held me back, and I'd say, okay, now bus, that's it, no more. And then again, we would start, and then again, it would be a case of, okay, that's it. Thing. More expansion has taken place since I handed over in 2005. Since I handed over, there's been more expansion in those years.
I want to get to that, and I want to get back to the teacher training piece as well. But one quick kind of follow-up question. We met Dr. Amjad Saqib, and he shared this idea that small is beautiful and intimate, which you experienced in your Montessori. But that scale is critical, especially a country of such magnitude. And you have also mentioned that there were some other private schools that were functional, but mostly small, like missionary institutions at that time. And I'm just curious, what was the difference between, or what enabled you to grow Beaconhouse in a way that perhaps hadn't been done before? Was it the systems? Was it the ambition? Was it other people must have been feeling the demand as well. And so I know you're saying like it was demand, but it must have been also more than that. I'm just wondering what...
You see, the missionary schools, by and large, are held by missionaries, and of course, they're not into expansion or anything like that. Lahore had its own, Islamabad had its own. Every place they have their own missionary schools, and they had mission funding, because as you know, the missionary schools fees were always on the low side, so they used to have mission funding and things like that. So they could only expand as much as their funding allowed them to. They couldn't really expand beyond that. So in my case, obviously, it was very demand driven also, but the fear was there. The fear was there. It's like when you're walking in the dark, the fear is there, but you do keep walking. You don't stop, And so the fear, the panic was always there. Will I get the teachers? Will I be able to manage? Will it work? That fear and insecurity was always there. But then I did keep going. So my expansion was a little more slow, and I was building my systems and things like that in those days. And once my systems were done, I had done my curriculum, I'd done my management system, the people were there, then expansion was not so much of a problem. And I had my training, I was training my teachers. So all the issues which created insecurity, I addressed to some extent.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I feel this is what we as growing enterprises struggle with the most, is building those systems.
How did you build those systems? Management systems, because you need a good management system to be able to manage more than one. You see, one institution you manage yourself, you're hands-on. And that's not, you don't need any management system as such, you're hands-on. But from 1 to 2, you need some management system, and then 3 and 4. So your management systems have to be, well designed, well defined, and everything. Then the major requirement of any school is teachers, good teachers, good trained teachers. So we had our training that we did, and so a lot of these things had been streamlined. So then meeting the need and the demand was, if I didn't do it, somebody else would do it. So why shouldn't I do it? If there was a vacuum, then I would want to step into that vacuum, because I had the wherewithal.
And just to get a bit granular, were you involved in building those systems? Did you bring on someone who's like an ops person? What did that kind of look like for someone who
I was not a qualified manager. I mean, I hadn't done my MBA or anything. Whatever I was learning on the job. But yes, I did bring in people. One of the people that I brought in to help me was a consultant, Frank Garvey-Williams, and he came twice, and he wrote these manuals, and he sort of, he's the one who advised me for better management, you have to now divide the schools into 3 regions, north, center, and south, and set up their own offices. So he made out these manuals. At that time, we were about 15,000 students, not more than that.
Okay.
So yes, I did bring him in, and he helped me out. Otherwise, local advice also one was taking, And another big, I would say, good fortune that I had and Beaconhouse had is that it was mostly women. And I find it so much easier to work with women. Why? Not simply because I'm a woman myself, but I find that women are more committed, more dedicated. They have greater integrity, greater commitment. So I've had that. Sorry, don't want to get gender specific, but that is the case.
No.
I worked with women.
I read that about 60% of your staff is women, and I think it's a testament. I mean, Beaconhouse as an institution is a testament to.
Teachers are mostly, teaching profession is favored by women, and that's why 60%. But otherwise, in our senior positions also, we have a lot of women.
I want to get back to that idea as well. But last question on the systems building thing. You said somewhere that you knew that you could achieve a lot more if you were to devise the systems whereby you delegated the work so that individual schools could be run as systems with benchmarks. And on your timeline in the front office, it shows that by 1993 you were at 50 schools, which is pretty incredible to think that from 77 technically.
78, yeah.
Yeah, 78 to 93, you were able to build these 50 schools.
And was it 50?
Yeah, I was also surprised that that amount of growth happened. And so related to that, in 2002, you started The Educators, which is a franchise model. And a lot of entrepreneurs, probably especially investors, are excited about this idea of franchising. And I think as your journey shows, you've carefully gone into franchising, as in you've spent a lot of time before getting to that point. And so I'm curious, how did you know 2002 was the right time? And what did you do in order to try and help ensure that the systems you built were adopted by these franchises so that the quality, as you pointed to earlier, was not...
Benji, there's a thing called instinct in this country because things are not that well, documented, and you don't have figures and things like that you get all the... So there is a lot of things that you do with instinct also. And it wasn't as such that I knew that 2002 was the right time. It was just that I had been looking at, I realized by that time that Beaconhouse was becoming quite expensive for a lot of people because, the fee level was going up. And I felt that we should have a middle tier school. And a lot of discussion took place and all that. And we realized that, if you're going to do a middle tier school, maybe it's better to do a franchise system rather than run them ourselves, which is obviously much more difficult to run the schools in smaller places and all that. So we spent a good year developing all the manuals and systems for the school, and launched the school. In the earlier 1 or 2 years, people weren't quite sure what it was. People weren't used to a franchise chain of schools, so it was difficult to explain to them. It was the first 2 or 3 years were slow, and then people started understanding. Now in the last 4 or 5 years, every year you see 2 or 3 people jumping into the market with some franchise school thing. But they're not able to sustain it as well because, we went slow. We were slow, and our systems are developing. We were making our mistakes, correcting ourselves, learning things. So, our learning took place on the field, and we learned. And then you get in franchisees who are sometimes not right.
You talked about training. Teacher training is obviously a big part of that, but staff training is obviously a huge need.
Yeah,
I mean, everyone knows, I think probably every entrepreneur knows how important training is, and yet it's very hard. It's not like you just decide, I want to teach this skill like critical thinking or problem solving or initiative or punctuality or time management, and then you develop a program and that person develops those skills. What have you learned? I mean, obviously as an educator, but even more so like with your team, your management, your staff, and your teachers. Have you learned anything that works really well? Have you learned anything that certainly doesn't work? What are some of the lessons, maybe mistakes, maybe successes you've had with training?
Look, with training, people have to be motivated into it. People have to be motivated into it. And when my staff was training, I was training myself too. In everything in the earlier years that I expected of the staff, I was in it myself. They welcomed it because they were also struggling. So, it wasn't as if I was having to push it onto people. I wasn't forcing people into it. They were happy for this opportunity. They are working and they are training, and at the end of it, they get a certificate also, which is something, which is the type of thing which is available in the West, where you come from, California. A lot of people have, you have night school and you have on-the-job training and you have a lot of things, opportunities available, which weren't there in this country, which are still not there.
In terms of managing your team and especially the people reporting directly to you, is there anyone who sticks in your mind as someone who you were able to really help reach their full potential in terms of managing them and developing them? What did you do? What did you learn? Can that be extrapolated into a broader lesson for how to develop?
There are many people, I feel, that I helped them reach their potential. I wouldn't like to take names, but the point is that there are many people who, for one reason or another...
what did you do? What do you feel was the difference?
Trust them. Trust them and encourage them, and give them responsibility, and tell them that, look, you can do it. I mean, don't sort of shy away from it. You can do it. You have the capacity to do it, because I saw in them that capacity to be able to do something. So you trust them with responsibility, and I think, you see, when you work with people, you can tell that, okay, this person has the capacity to do it, this person doesn't have the capacity to do it, and the person who has the capacity to do it has to be encouraged and trusted to do it, and they do perform.
I think trust feels like a prerequisite, and then my question is it enough, or is there a risk that if you trust completely, then you're abdicating and not necessarily supporting that person along the way? So I'm sure you probably trusted them, but then
you do gradually. There's a time when you step back. Even when I handed over to Qasim in 2005, for many years I was very insecure, and I was constantly snooping around to find out what he was doing and why he was doing it and how he was doing it and all that. Trying, it a difficult exercise not to make him feel like he's not trusting, but at the same time, I had the insecurity. So, it takes time. It's a process. Human beings are so different. They're so different.
Thankfully, they're different.
Compare one to the other.
What was that process like of, I guess, kind of transitioning? How did you know that 2005 was the right time to step into the chairman role and to allow someone else like Qasim to come in as CEO? And how did you help make sure that transition was smooth, or as smooth as it could be?
You see, 2003, my husband became a minister. Even though I didn't go with him to Islamabad, I stayed on here. And I decided that, I now have time because, he's a politician, and I've led a very, very busy life, my work and then his politics. I finish my work, go home, and then there are the children, and then his politics and political entertaining and all that. So once he became a minister, it seemed like I had time on my hands. So I went and joined an MBA program. And once I did that, I realized that it was a lot of work. Doing an MBA was no joke. And then the fact that I didn't go to Islamabad didn't mean that I didn't have official duties at all. I had to, from time to time, go to Islamabad. So I I realized by about 2005, I realized that I was not able to handle the situation. So now what do I do? So I decided that, okay, this is the time to hand over. Because instead of juggling and letting Beaconhouse slip, I wasn't going to, I was not going to step out of my MBA thing. I joined it and I was going to go through with it. And my husband's commitments to my husband, even if I kept them to the minimum, there was some commitment that they were there. So I couldn't I could reduce them. I couldn't really totally cancel them out. So the only thing that would end up suffering would be Beaconhouse, and I didn't want Beaconhouse to suffer. So that was when I handed over. If I hadn't joined the MBA, or my husband hadn't become a minister, I may have gone on for another couple of years. 2 or 3 years. But at that time, I thought that, I was struggling. I was not able to manage three.
I wanted to ask kind of a last group of questions, really just about your own personal work ethic and how you manage your time and how you manage some of the routines that have allowed you to be successful or that you have learned a lot from. And I guess the most obvious question is, how are you able to do so much through Beaconhouse and beyond? It's hard to even summarize everything under the umbrella. And so I'm wondering, probably not now, but like in the height of the busyness for you, how were you able to manage all of the work, and what percentage of the time did you spend doing things that like you really enjoyed in work versus things that you had to do because you just had to do it? There was no one else to do it.
I've led a very busy life, yes, and it's not just because of Beaconhouse, it's because my husband is in politics, and politics, starts in the evening. By and large, they start their meetings. So, I would finish my work and go home, and there would be people there, and something or the other would be going on, and over the weekends and everything. So, it's it was like a 16, 18-hour day. It's been a very busy life. And, you devise systems as you go along. You don't, there's no book that tells you what you're going to do. All of us have different lives and different environments. And as you go along, you devise your systems, all right, you do it this way, or you do it that way, or this is working and that is not working. A bit of trial and error and everything. I've never found a book that could sort of tell me how to do things.
Do you have any like routines that you
I have one thing about me is that I am a disciplined person. I believe in discipline, and I believe in routine. When I was working, when I was the chief executive, I made sure I was never late. I was here 5 minutes before, time. I ran a school also for the first few years. I used to run a school, and I was never late for that. And that was one thing I expected of my teachers. And then in my office, I expected of my staff that please don't be late. And don't look at your watch and walk off. Finish the work on your table. If you have to stay an extra half hour, 40 minutes, do that. Discipline is important. Discipline is important, and that's one of the reasons why, this is a question that a lot of people have asked me, because my husband is so active in politics, and have you never thought of politics? And no, I have never thought of politics, but because in politics there is no discipline. And there's a lot of flexibility, and I'm not flexible. I'm not a flexible person. I believe in discipline. If I give somebody an appointment, I want that person to be on time. If I have to go somewhere, I want to be on time. I expect my staff to be on time. And as long as I was in the riding seat, people were not late, you know. But I turn a blind eye to it now. But the point is that so the two things that are things that I haven't learned, but that are part of my personality, is discipline, and good or bad, but I'm a little inflexible. So both those things.
What does that mean,
never
inflexible? Like, and how do you adjust for that? I mean, look, I think a lot of entrepreneurs are a little inflexible.
I know I have to make compromises sometimes, but most of the time, if I make a decision, once I've made a decision, I don't easily change my mind. It's a well-considered decision, and I don't then, because there are always other points of view. There are always other points of view. You have to decide one way or the other. You have to make a decision. Once you made a decision, then stick by it. It's you can always be wrong. I mean, nobody is always right, and I have not always been right in my life. But once I make a decision, obviously I take people into confidence, and we sit down to make a decision. Once I make the decision, most of the time people will recommend that you take a decision which is the easiest way out, which is the route of least resistance. Sometimes that's not the right decision. Sometimes you have to take the more difficult decision. And once you've taken that, then it's best to stick by it.
Last question that I have for you. I'm fascinated how you got your MBA in 2005. And I think it just speaks to the type of person you are and the type of institution you've built, which is centered around this idea of learning and more specifically on lifelong learning. And so I'm just wondering, like, these days, how are you exercising that practice of being a lifelong learner? What do you do in order to continue learning? What did you do as a CEO to continue to develop yourself? I'm not CEO,
I'm chairperson.
I'm saying before, how did you continue to develop yourself? I'm a chairperson,
and the MBA helped me a lot. The MBA helped me a lot. A lot of things. You see, when you do your MBA after you work for as long as I had worked, it's very exciting, because when you're doing your MBA, you realize that a lot of things that you were doing are things that they're telling you to do. You stumbled upon those practices. You sort of, by trial and error, you stumbled on the practices that they're recommending. So that makes you feel good. And there are lots of areas where obviously you say, okay, so this is what I should have done, So it's a lot of, you relate to what you've done. And then obviously some of the things that I never knew and I never made the effort to learn: accounting, finance, all those terms, those fancy terms which people used to, when, in the course of discussion with bankers and all, they would use all these fancy terms, and I would say, oh, now what does that mean? So, you learn what those fancy terms mean. So you do finance, and you do accounting. I mean, you don't do accounting as in a chartered accounting, but you do the basics. So you understand the debit, credit, and all that. So you understand a lot of those things. So it was a very interesting experience for me, very interesting. And also because the MBA that I did was not a full-time MBA. It's called the Triumph MBA, which is 3 universities, and you go to different countries and you do 6 weeks and 6 weeks, and you meet a lot of people, mid-management people from different parts of the world. So, it's a part of the networking also, and interacting with people, sharing experiences. You see, being an entrepreneur and being a CEO as I was is very lonely. in many ways, because you don't get to, you don't have colleagues in that sense to share with. You have a large number of people that work for you, but sometimes you can't share good, bad practices with people. So that way, that gives you that opportunity. That gives you, and I would recommend my sons to do that.
Was this the only chance you had to be a part of a network? Or, I mean, I think a lot of entrepreneurs do feel that isolation, and they're wondering, how do I have to go to the extreme of doing an MBA? Or are there some practices that I could do perhaps to connect with people, or learn as I'm going along the journey?
Benji, my situation was a little bit unique in the sense that I had, like I said, I had a 16-hour day. A man, I don't have a wife. Let's put it like that. I do my work. I go home. I have a house to run. I have children to look after. I have a husband who has politics. So I'm sort of like working like 16, 18 hours. And I'm not saying that I'm slaving away. I'm enjoying a lot of what I'm doing. But I have very little time to interact with and engage with people at my level. I didn't have too much of that luxury. It's a different situation. You see, most men who are at that level, they are members of associations. They sort of contest elections in those associations. They meet with each other. They interact. I couldn't.
How did you find that? How did you find that support then before the MBA? I mean, 2005 you had been working for over 30 years at that point. Yeah. So those 30 years, how were you able to find that support and that learning?
A lot of, things, different ways, occasional ways. I had a lot of friends. I would interact with my friends. I had some very good friends that I would talk to, I would interact with and all that. I couldn't really be part of that clubby situation. Yeah. I just didn't have the time. And then, you see, what I found was rather funny, actually, that because there aren't that many women working, now there are more, of course. At my time, there weren't enough women working. They don't have, culturally, if I go to a bank, they find it awkward to put me into a waiting room where men are sitting and smoking and chatting and loudly. So they would like to put me in a room where, just more. So they don't have ladies' waiting rooms. And so I used to, when I went to a bank to see somebody, they would put me into somebody's office because the main waiting room had a lot of very rowdy men sitting in it, and they thought that, I wouldn't want to be sitting with them, which I wouldn't. I remember going to the CBR once, FBR now it's known as, to see the chairman. And there was total panic there because they didn't know where to put me. While I was waiting for him to meet with me, so they took me into his office, and he was sitting at the far end with some visitors, and I was made to sit on the table this end. Obviously, because they just didn't know where to put me. Being a woman, they had that problem. That there's no waiting room for women, and there's this concept you can't put men and women together, so that sort of thing. So there was that interesting, challenging, sometimes annoying.
It's incredible.
You see, working in this country has its compensations as a woman, has its compensations, and has its issues also.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of people who are sometimes very patronizing, which is very annoying. Not anymore now because I'm so much older, but in my younger days there was that patronizing attitude, and which is what I used to find annoying. But at the same time, they did make concessions for a woman, which they don't do in the West, In the West, if you're in a bus and you're standing, nobody will get up and give you their seat. Here, they still will do that. they'll still give you their seat. If I'm on a PIA thing, if I'm in the bus, and I'm standing, somebody will get up and give me their seat. So they do make a concern. If I go to see a banker, in those days I used to go see, and he had 6 other people waiting, but he would see me first. Get rid of her, see her and have her go. And,
it's incredible. It's incredible. I'm so glad that you have paved the way for so many. It's an inspiration for us. Your journey of being a lifelong learner has, I think, just created these huge ripple effects throughout the country and throughout the world. Well, thank you so much, Mrs. Kasuri, for your journey, for sharing parts of it with us, for taking out the time, and for continuing the work.
Thank you for coming, Benji. It's nice talking to you.
Thank you so much.